on our dopamine and how we feed perfectionism, but we can look back to brain chemistry. So I want to talk through some of that, specifically with the sugar, the anxiety, and the energy, and give you all some really practical tips in this webinar. But I do want to acknowledge the stress part. And I don't have time in today's webinar to really go into that, but I don't want to diminish it. You know, as a nutritionist, there are lots of foods that can make a big difference. There are some specific nutrients that can make a big difference, but I don't believe it's the only piece. I think it's a foundational, important piece. But I do want to acknowledge that there is the emotional piece of how that impacts our nervous system and our immune system, and particularly around the ACE study. So I'll assume that most of you on the webinar today hopefully have heard about the ACE study, the Adverse Childhood Experience Study. I became very interested in it as a nutritionist because it started as a weight loss study in the mid-90s with Kaiser Permanente in California and the CDC. It's the biggest public health kind of study, the most important public health study for all practitioners in the health and wellness field to know about. Whether you're a dietitian, nutritionist, a nurse, a physician, a social worker, therapist, yoga instructor, anyone who is in the front lines doing one-on-one work with people, changing their habits, changing their behaviors around anything with health, anything with wellness, it's imperative to know about the ACE study. So if you Google this title at the top of this slide, a tribute to Dr. Sorry, it cut off. Vincent Felitti is his last name. Sorry, it's not on there, but Vincent Felitti. It's the most important thing that you could Google today, and the most important information you can take in today. It's about an 11-minute video that really explains the history. I don't have time to go into the whole history of how it started as a weight loss study, and came into, it's not just like, oh, wave off a hand, we're all stressed. No, there's very direct connections to the immune response and to the nervous system response. And so when we say things like GABA and serotonin get depleted because of stress, this study explains the actual rubber how the rubber meets the road of how this stress starts to impact the physiology and then deplete things like cortisol, insulin, GABA, serotonin, because why are those things being depleted? This study tells you. So if you know about it, watch this video. It's very well done about the leading physician who is in charge of the biggest public health study in the history of our country. If you don't know about it, go watch it. So I just want to say that and acknowledge that there is the trauma component with how it affects our physiology. But today, again, I want to just stay with some of the physiology piece, particularly around nutrition and eating for recovery. Whether you're listening yourself, you may identify with, the food struggle or the sugar struggle. It might be alcohol for you as well. Even working in this industry, it might be cigarettes. It might be that perfectionistic drive, almost like an obsession about exercise. There's a behavior and kind of a vice that most people resonate with, that when we get squeezed, what's that thing we go to help us try to feel better? It doesn't feel good to not feel good. So we reach for, things to try to change our state. And when we come back to a functional nutrition piece, particularly food, which a lot of people tend to like to start with. They're like, what can I do food-wise? Where can I start with my diet to help me feel better and not reach out and use different substances or behaviors to alter my state? And I like to bring everyone back to the physiology of the three things that the body wants to eat. And those three things are big macro, big nutrient categories, which is protein, carbohydrates, and fat. And again, I want to acknowledge that we realistically, very much all of us will eat for convenience reasons, for emotional reasons, for body image reasons, for values, valuing organic or GMO, and preference and budget. So there's all those components, and I want to acknowledge that, but I do want to keep it just for our short time here, that why the body needs protein, carbohydrates, and fat on a physiological, just strict nutrition level, and how that can help the brain and eating for recovery. So beginning with protein. And protein can be an animal source of protein like beef, lamb, buffalo, poultry, seafood, any kind of fish, or more of a vegetarian protein like nuts and beans and tofu. Either way, vegetable and animal protein all break down into amino acids. And I'm going to skip to this slide here and then come back. So why protein is so important is because of when it comes down into amino acids, these individual amino acids have very specific direct functions that can help calm the brain, can help reduce cravings, and can produce anti-anxiety, anti-depression effects. So I just singled out a couple. Again, this is information that I could spend 3 hours on. But just quickly, going down the list, the amino acid alanine specifically has a real function for helping the sugar metabolism and giving energy to the brain. When you eat animal or vegetable protein, you will get the alanine amino acid that's going to give you that benefit. L-glutamine is another amino acid I'll talk about in more depth in a minute. But there's particular good research and data that L-glutamine can help reduce sugar and alcohol cravings. And that's kind of either people are kind of one or the other. They tend to crave alcohol, they tend to crave sugar. They quit one, they go to the other. So L-glutamine is a great thing to know about. Glycine can have a really calming effect on the brain. Just, skipping down, taurine supports brain function, helps to regulate blood sugar. Tyrosine is a building block for norepinephrine and dopamine. Tryptophan, commonly we think of it, in turkey, dairy products, or milk. Again, protein sources, but it can help reduce depression and boost serotonin, and it can help us sleep. So, and you guys can kind of read through the rest there. But this is why I recommend protein, animal or vegetable, because it does two things. It helps stabilize blood sugar, and especially after people have been drinking, blood sugar gets really wacky. What goes up must come down. So if people, typically drink a bottle of wine in the evening or a handful of drinks every evening, that's a lot of sugar into the bloodstream. And the body says, that's great, I can use that sugar for energy, but if it stays circulating in the bloodstream, it's diabetes. So every time we eat or drink something with a lot of sugar, the body it's a double-edged sword. It needs to quickly pull it out of the bloodstream. So it releases this insulin, pulls those sugar molecules out. Now blood sugar's low. Now it doesn't feel good to have low blood sugar. So now it's like, I want to drink or eat something sugary again. I don't feel well. It's hard to sleep. I feel a little shaky, maybe a little irritable. So when we eat protein, it stabilizes that up and down roller coaster and can hold blood sugar for about 3 or 4 hours. So when people are on that, they've been eating a lot of sugar, drinking a lot of alcohol, trying to kind of rebalance their biochemistry, the best thing you can do is eat some protein every time you eat, just about the size of your palm, whatever your preference is for protein. The other macronutrient that's really important to remember is fat, particularly the omega-3 fat. And same kind of mechanism, omega-3 fats, particularly fish oil, or eating fish, because it breaks down into the EPA, DHA, which that is the raw material that makes neurotransmitters, serotonin, dopamine, and GABA. So replenishing our brain and our body with the omega-3 fats helps to replenish the brain. And it's not just, omega-3 fats. We actually fortify baby formula with EPA, DHA, because women just are not getting enough of that crucial macronutrient that's so crucial for brain development. In utero, when babies are little, but it really is cradle to grave throughout our lifespan when we're talking about buffering tension, buffering stress, giving the brain those nutrients that do that. The omega-3 fats are crucial. If you don't eat fish, you can get omega-3 fats in flax seeds, chia seeds, walnuts are fantastic. I really like walnut oil to put on salads, like walnut oil with good balsamic vinegar. But that good healthy fat and a good source of protein 3 times a day, those amino acids and those fatty acids feed the brain and they feed the body. And then the carbohydrates, there's 3 big categories, and generally people think potatoes, rice, bread is, you know, kind of the initial comments that I get when I'm with groups and ask them about carbohydrates. But the truth is the ideal form of carbohydrates is vegetables. So you can't go wrong with colorful vegetables. That's where the enzymes are, it's where the fiber is, the antioxidants. One of the most fascinating functional medicine conferences, lectures that I ever sat in a couple years ago was with a medical doctor who had gone to Duke University, and he spoke for an hour about the chemical mechanisms of broccoli, and it was fascinating. And I know you're all probably listening now, you're like, yeah, vegetables. I mean, we've all heard it, in one ear, out the other. But the chemical mechanism of fruits and vegetables, we can't recreate it in a lab. It's brilliant when we really start to break it down. So if there's, you know, any motivation of from, you know, a really ideal carbohydrate source to eat, again, whether you tend to eat more vegetarian or more of a paleo protein diet, filling your plate at any time with half your plate being vegetables is an ideal carbohydrate source. The next source, depending on where your biochemical tolerance is, how active you are, how you know, responsive you are to certain grains. Some people can tolerate more of the starchy, bready, floury, grainy carbohydrates. Some people can't tolerate a lot. But I like to remind people that wheat is not the only whole grain. There's brown rice, there's quinoa, spelt, amaranth, millet. Those are really, really high nutrient, high grain carbohydrates. And then the third category is the candy, the desserts, the alcohol, the sweet coffees, the juices, the sodas, all of that. So when people tell me that they're doing a no carb diet, I'm curious if that means no M&Ms or no broccoli. So keeping the vegetables up at a high level, getting in a source of protein for the amino acids and a source of fat for the omega-3 fatty acids. Across the board for cravings, anxiety, and energy, this is the foundation of kind of functional nutrition with that. So I want to then jump into some specific ways to actually reduce sugar cravings. Again, I could talk, you know, we could spend a half a day or a full day. There's so many things to go into. I singled out 4 to highlight. So just know this is not the exhaustive list, but I wanted to give you some practical things, you know, just for this talk today. Eating regularly, psychically and psychologically. A big component to stress, when people say, you know, I reach to a drink or I reach to sugar, when things are feeling chaotic or unpredictable or you know, inconsistent, that doesn't feel good to our nervous system. Having, you know, like a regular routine, knowing kind of what we can expect, and especially when we come down to basic needs of keeping us alive by eating food. And when the body doesn't know the next time you're going to eat or if you're going to eat, it becomes a stress in and of itself. And so I talk, especially, you know, a lot with clients. One of the best things you can do is just eat on a regular basis. Most people don't do that, and it sounds simple, but it's profound. So eating regularly, psychically, emotionally, gives the message to your body that it can trust you and that you are going to feed it. We can go down rabbit holes and split hairs later about what kind of food you're eating. But one of the best things to do to help to kind of, you know, big picture offset cravings is if your body can trust that you're going to eat around the same time every morning when you wake up, around the same time midday, and then around the same time at the end of the day. A lot of people then, you know, it's helpful to have another meal mid-morning, a mini meal mid-afternoon. But just there's something to breakfast, lunch, dinner. So eat regularly. It helps your blood sugar. It helps cravings psychically and psychologically. Just another quick tip is to watch artificial sweeteners. Now, you're going to get different opinions on this, depending on different nutritionists and dietitians that you talk to. Today on my webinar, I'll give you my opinion, and I back it by some of the journal articles and research that's out there. I highly recommend when any of these pieces with supplements and nutrition pieces, go to PubMed, and it's an easy Google search, and put in PubMed artificial sweeteners and cravings, artificial sweeteners and depression. The research is there. And so I refer practitioners all the time, go to PubMed, the journal articles, you can find them. There's quite a bit about artificial sweeteners and cravings and the mechanisms of where it starts to disrupt things with neurotransmitters and with brain chemistry. And again, I'm pulling this from research. I've seen it clinically too with clients who come in with kind of a binge mentality. They may go the whole week or a couple weeks and not drink, and then go out and just kind of have the blowout of with alcohol or with food, kind of that same way. And one thing with the NutraSweet, with the artificial sweeteners, is it starts to block some of those neurotransmitter pathways. And back to that original slide of like what depletes neurotransmitters, toxins was on there. This would be something I would consider a toxin. The body and the brain start to get confused, and it starts to give the message, I'm not full, I'm not satisfied, I can't sleep, I feel more depressed because of that artificial sweetener being in the mechanism. The brain and the body know what to do with a sugar molecule. They either use it as energy or pull it out of the bloodstream and store it as fat. But the artificial sweetener molecules are funky, and they really mess with the brain. So with clients, and when I have them take artificial sweeteners out, if they're doing a lot of diet sodas, it tends to really calm down cravings. So just kind of a little FYI, again, there's different opinions out there about that, but if I see people that are really struggling with alcohol and sugar in a binge form, I'm very curious if artificial sweeteners are in the mix. In general, I like to try to add things in. So, there can be times where taking alcohol out, it's kind of an either or. And then I think there's other things that, it just kind of has to come out. Artificial sweeteners is often one of them. But in general, food, I don't demonize. Real food has a lot of benefits, has a lot of functions, depending what you're trying to do. So people will say, well, what about white potatoes, or what about avocados or eggs? Or they're great. They're great. When we break them down chemically, if you're trying to bring down inflammation or bring down anxiety, or there's real specific foods we can point to. So in general, I add in. I don't like to take away, but artificial sweeteners is a little bit of a thing to know about. So L-glutamine, I did mention earlier in the amino acid slide. There's good research with both humans and animals that suggests that L-glutamine can reduce cravings and anxiety that accompanies alcohol withdrawal, which is also sugar withdrawal. So it's both. Participants either took a placebo or 1 gram of L-glutamine in divided doses with meals. The results are published. Again, you can find other studies on L-glutamine in PubMed, but pretty good results. And again, I watch it clinically as well. When I recommend for clients to take some L-glutamine. The other, the place, if you don't like supplements, totally fine. The place in food where L-glutamine is really, really abundant is in fermented vegetables or kimchi or sauerkraut. But it's not sauerkraut that's next to the pickles in the supermarket. It's the fermented sauerkraut that's in the refrigerated section, like in Whole Foods or your local health food store. Tastes like sauerkraut. If you like sauerkraut, which I do, it can be really yummy, really tasty. But that's that good fermented bacteria that is actually really high in L-glutamine. And the benefit of fermented foods, kombucha, if people aren't too sensitive, there can be a small alcohol component. So if they're sensitive, I don't recommend kombucha, but if it's not a problem, you get a good fermented component in kombucha, kefir, fermented vegetables, probiotic capsules, apple cider vinegar. And all of this fermented food can help reduce cravings. And the mechanism that helps reduce cravings is it puts the good bacteria back into the gut. And when we have a good balance of good bacteria in our intestines, we have more receptors for GABA and serotonin in our intestinal tract. And we need good bacteria to promote that mechanism of that GABA and serotonin to produce in the intestines. So that's how L-glutamine can both help stop cravings and can also help boost in the gut the GABA and serotonin receptors. Those are just 3 kind of, FYIs. Again, I have many, many more, but because of time, I'll move on. But I want to say one thing about the somatic, meaning body, kind of the somatic relaxation, more the lifestyle component around cravings. So I often ask clients, we'll talk through, how do you know if you're physically hungry? And they'll often say, like my stomach growls. I feel kind of lightheaded. I get a headache. They're physical cues. When we're physically hungry and the body needs us to eat physical food, we feel a physical symptom. But it's then distinguishing between, my stomach's not growling, I'm not physically hungry, but I am just uncomfortable right now. It's been a hard morning. My level of angst is up. I can't really put my thumb on it, but I just don't want to feel like this. I want to kind of get out of this uncomfortable angst, which is, kind of that feeling of when we all then reach to a substance or behavior. So coming back to, that has nothing to do with food, what are you really craving? And again, the mind and the psyche need other nutrients besides just fish oil. And those nutrients are you just hungry for nature and being outdoors and being in the sunshine, being next to water or trees? Are you hungry for connection? Have you been isolated the last couple days or week and just need connection with other people? Intimacy, touch, body work can be a really great way to invoke that. And thinking about who are the people who really uplift you, who you really like being with. That's very nourishing. Do you need just solitude? Have you been around too many people lately and you just need to be kind of hunkered down, cozied up by yourself at home? Are you hungry for a creative outlet? So, I often hear from people, they drink to have fun, they drink as a way to relax. And I say, what are your hobbies? And it's often a big silence. And so we equate, these substances as a way to feel playful or to have fun. But going back to, we can eat and drink all the food and drink in the world, but it's not going to nourish that hunger for true kind of creative fun and play. So from a craving standpoint, often, there are physiological depletions with minerals, with, blood sugar imbalance, with hormones, and, there's things to do on a functional nutrition, platform to go in and kind of support that and boost that malnourishment. But we can also be craving the emotional side of things. So I like to talk clients through that as well. Some anxiety reducing tips. This is what I mentioned a minute ago about if it's food, it's not bad in my book. But different foods can have different functions depending on what your goal is. Well, people, again, it's like, is this food bad? And I say, I don't know. What's your goal? What are you trying to do right now? So if you're actually trying to reduce anxiety, there are certain foods that can give just kind of a natural boost to GABA. And there's foods that can, boost all neurotransmitters. But the ones for GABA, and GABA's that are built in, when our GABA is balanced, we don't feel as anxious. When our GABA is depleted, I heard a doctor one time describe it as, it's the feeling of you're in an 18-wheeler semi-truck going down a mountain highway with no brakes. Imagine how your body feels in the cab of that truck. That's how it feels to have low GABA in your body. So some foods that can have a little bit of a GABA boost are almonds, which are also great for blood sugar control, bananas, white potatoes, There was a book a couple years ago called Potatoes Not Prozac, and the whole book is about how a white potato in the evening boosts the neurotransmitters and helps people sleep. Beef liver, which typically most people don't eat these days, broccoli, halibut, spinach. There's many, many others. If it's whole food, it's going to help the brain, but those are just a couple. Another thing that I wanted to highlight is a nutrient called inositol. Sometimes we call it vitamin B8, but it's not technically a B vitamin. You can get it in foods like cantaloupe, beans, grapefruit, soy lecithin, again, beef liver, which we just don't eat, or molasses. And, you know, typically, think for yourself, like, when's the last time you had cantaloupe or molasses or beans? Maybe it was yesterday, but they're foods that typically we don't eat in a big abundance. And that's where we get inositol, but it's a really versatile nutrient for promoting brain wellness. It can really help sleep. And where I look to it is for anxiety. So any kind of anxiety, panic, OCD meaning obsession about food and calories and, you know, constantly exercising. That can be a ruminating form of OCD, you know, up to the spectrum of like checking the lock on the door before you leave 48 times. Like, it's that ruminating kind of can't turn the brain off, anxious thinking. Inositol, sorry, these slides, I'm just noticing that I put it in PowerPoint and they're long, but I'm happy to share them. But shared some of the references on this. Again, when you go to PubMed and you put in inositol and anxiety, the research is there. And once again, it's something I've used myself, have really liked the effects from it. It's not a drug effect. Again, it's basically a B vitamin. And when I work with clients, what they'll say to me is, I don't know, I'm taking it and maybe it's just a placebo. Maybe I'm just like kidding myself, but I just feel better. And I'm like, no, it's, you know, I think the inositol really helps to kind of stop that dump of anxiety and ruminating thoughts. So it's something that can be found in any health food store. I'm a bit of a stickler on high quality brands. I'm not connected with any supplement companies. I'm not in the business of selling supplements. But, you know, if you're finding that eating a lot of cantaloupe and grapefruit and beans aren't kind of getting on top of your anxiety, sometimes I think adding in something like inositol can be helpful. A retail brand that I like is Jarrow, Jarrow. I do think when we're doing some, you know, some brain support, it's important to have good quality, you know, a good brand. So really quickly on energy boosting tips. B vitamins. So every neurotransmitter has a direct relationship with a hormone. GABA has a direct relationship with progesterone, which is interesting because most of the clients I work with are women between 35 and 55, and it's that time of hormone shift, perimenopause, and many of them identify with the alcohol anxiety story. And when GABA goes down, because that's that anti-anxiety neurotransmitter, if we're feeling anxious, often we're low in GABA. When GABA goes down, progesterone goes down. And another component with progesterone is we feel anxious, we can't sleep, and cravings go up because it doesn't feel good when we have a major hormone that's depleted. And so with serotonin, the hormone connection is estrogen, and with dopamine, the hormone connection is cortisol. So when we talk about energy, often, you know, I see this too frequently, is that people will stop drinking and they're like, I'm exhausted. My energy is just, you know, plummeted and I'm so tired. That's that dopamine cortisol connection. It's the adrenal connection. Have been running on adrenaline, really depleting cortisol levels, kind of keeping dopamine up by using the vice or the behavior. When we take that vice or behavior out, all of a sudden we feel the effect of low dopamine and low cortisol, which doesn't feel good. So one of the like foundational things, there's many, again, I'll just give you one right now, but one of the foundational things for your adrenal glands, and which will ultimately help dopamine, which ultimately helps your energy, is B vitamins. So a good B complex, and even then on top of that, a good B12. So B12 is very much connected with energy if it's depleted. And B6. And what's interesting about B6 is there is something called pyroluria, And again, Jeremy Maslow, who's a medical doctor, physician, does a lot of research on this, but it's a synthesis with our hemoglobin. And so all of us synthesize hemoglobin all the time, but for some people during that synthesis, the body binds extra B6 and extra zinc. And when that happens, we get extra depleted in B6 and zinc and then feel more anxious as a result of not having that mineral and that vitamin in our body. Can feel more introverted, can feel more socially anxious, nervous, feeling like we just don't have the threshold to kind of deal with stress. There's a list of symptoms with pyroluria. And again, often people, might think that they're overly anxious or just an introvert, and it's a physiological depletion of the B6 vitamin that can, we go in and just add extra B6. I like to take a B complex to get all the B vitamins and then do a little extra B6. The other important thing with B6 is it's an important precursor to the synthesis of serotonin. Again, if you don't want supplements, one of the highest kind of amounts where you can find B vitamins in food is leafy green vegetables. So going back to that, like, vegetables, it's in one ear, out the other. Here's the motivation to eat half your plate full of vegetables every time you eat because of B vitamins. A couple other things for energy. Toning your polyvagal nerve. So much to say about this. The polyvagal nerve is in the back of the cranium. It's this bundle of nerves that goes down to the gut. Really fascinating, things to say about the gut-brain connection. They're constantly kind of talking to each other, and how to kind of tone that nerve and build that resilience with that fight or flight kind of mechanism is many, many ways, but I listed two. One is cold water. So either, take a shower in the morning and then do 30 seconds of cold water. If you don't want to do that, just get a big bowl that you would, do baking in, like mix up a big batch of cookies, just a big bowl, put ice in it, put cold water in it, and then obviously hold your breath, put your face in it up to your hairline, and that helps to tone that nerve. And what it is it's training the body physiologically to kind of absorb the shock of that cold and then rebound. And high intensity training workouts do the same. So where you go hard for like 30 seconds, so you pedal really hard on the stationary bike, or you run, for 30 seconds, and then you stop, catch your breath, walk, let your breath come back. And that's that you're physiologically training your body to go hard, recover, go hard, recover. And what that does is it's training, it's that heart rate variability, because we don't always want to be on, and we don't want to always be in the frozen, kind of that fight, flight, freeze mechanism. And so working with the polyvagal nerve with specific exercises, lifestyle things, there's many, but these are just two. And then the third thing for energy is just good sleep hygiene. I work with clients a lot on kind of like eating on a regular basis, going to bed on a regular basis at the same time, and getting up at the same time. And then what's that routine of, kind of winding down at the end of the day. I like to take clients through a somatic practice, again, a body practice of coming back to their senses. So when we get anxious, our mind goes back to the past or it projects into the future. And when we talk about like being here, being present, being in the now, and being grounded, it's not like, okay, in theory that sounds good, but it's actually, there's really practical ways to do it. And the practical ways to do it is to use the somatic practice of coming back to your senses. So vision, smell, touch, taste, and sound. When the body starts to feel calm through the senses, it gives the message up the spinal cord to the brain that the brain can start to be calm. It's not the other way around. If you are really frantic right now and I say to you, just calm down, it could actually make it worse. But what can help is to give the message to your nervous system through your body that there's not a bear coming through the door right now, that it's okay. And so actually touching the ground with your feet, And you all can do that right now, even if you have shoes on. Just notice what it feels like, the sensation as the bottom of your feet touch the ground. So at any time, whether we're standing or sitting or lying down, some part of our body is always on the ground. And when you bring your attention to the ground, and then notice what happens with your breath when you notice that kind of anchor in your body actually touching the ground. So that's a touch component. You can always use the ground, which that's the practical way of starting to feel grounded. And there's, I do more of that like in an extended yoga kind of process, but it doesn't have to be a yoga pose. Just notice what it feels like as your feet are on the ground. Notice right now if you hear anything in your environment. And notice if you smell anything in your environment. Some people use diffusers or aromatherapy, and then notice if you taste anything, if you've recently drank something or eaten something. So we can use all of these in a very focused way of, at the end of the day, coming back to our senses, sitting, noticing the ground beneath us, listening to some soft music, ambient music, having something to eat or drink in a real intentional way. Like I like ginger tea, and like really paying attention to that ginger taste. Invoking smell. So using that coming back to the senses, we can nourish our senses, which starts to calm the body, which starts to calm the mind. So a morning and evening routine to kind of ground the body, help the body learn to stay more present. And then also going back to the physiology of just ruling out any hormone disturbances physiologically. So when sex hormones, particularly progesterone being low, or if melatonin is low, which is connected with serotonin, if blood sugar has been wacky through the day, it's going to be wacky through the middle of the night. So insulin, melatonin, progesterone, even testosterone, definitely the thyroid hormone. If any of those are depleted, they're big hitters. And we can do all the positive kind of self-talk and meditation in the world, but it doesn't replenish those depleted hormones. So I will often look at blood results from, with clients, and encourage clients to go get a complete physical just to see where things are for an energy perspective, which can help keep their energy up and can help them sleep at night. So just a quick kind of summary on these points again. Reminder that we could spend half a day or a full day really going into all of this and more. But whatever you or your clients are dealing with, I look at it as kind of laying the foundation and then building and adding on top of that. And laying the foundation of eating real food is always going to help your brain. It's always going to help blood sugar, cravings, anxiety, and energy. So there's a method behind the madness of real food. It's not to check a box and be a good person because you've done something healthy. It's literally to physiologically feed your body on a regular basis so that we don't get into excessive cravings or just not feeling well. And then remembering, to build on top of that, there can be specific nutrients if you want to add them, or just increase more of those foods that are high in those nutrients. Somatic exercises, there's many, and I do a lot of work with that. And good sleep goes a long way, because sleep in and of itself, when we go into that deep REM, unaltered sleep from chemicals, and we're naturally in that deep restorative sleep, that's when neurotransmitters are rebuilt. That's when the body rebuilds them. It's the time it takes the amino acids, the fatty acids, and starts to rebuild. It's also the time that it starts to balance out and bring down our cortisol levels. So sleep is really, really important from the brain standpoint. So I'm happy to take any questions. I know I shot through all of that pretty quickly, but again, wanted to hopefully give you something that you could try this afternoon and put in a practical way into your own life. You can find me at healthydiscoveries.com. I do a lot of consulting with organizations and groups, and I train other practitioners and work with organizations with their employees who want this information. And then I also do coaching one-on-one. And again, my clientele is a lot of high-achieving professionals who don't necessarily, they're not to a place where they need a detox, but they themselves know that the way they're drinking is not working for them. And I talk a lot about that on a podcast I co-host called Editing Our Drinking and Our Lives. My co-host is in New York City. She's a former attorney. She's now a stay-at-home mom with 3 girls, and she's a published fiction author. And she made the decision, like me, to stop drinking. So we talk a lot about that. We find there's a huge demographic that this is really resonating with today. It's kind of been a conversation that hasn't been out there in the past. And then for just kind of, the 15 minutes quick recap of the neurotransmitters, a little bit more of my story. I did a TED Talk November 2017 on gray area drinking. So if you Google my name, TED Talk, or the title, it will come up and you can watch that. So I'm happy to take whatever questions anyone has.
Thank you, Jolene. I'm going to give people a minute or two to type in some of their questions. In waiting for that, I have a question for you, two actually. One a comment and the other a question. What is your opinion on stevia as an alternative to a sweetener from, say, Splenda or Sweet and Low that tends to be much more negatively seen these days in the food industry?
Yeah, good question. So stevia is from, a real plant. It looks like a mint leaf, like how we grow mint, in our garden. That's what true stevia looks like. We can grow it. I'm fine with it because it's real food. We know how to grow it. I steer people away from Truvia. So Truvia is a patented form of it where they have altered the chemicals a little bit. Same thing with Splenda. They've broken those molecules in Splenda, and so chemically it's chlorine, which is weird. How they've broken that glucose molecule. And Truvia is kind of the same way. So as long as it's not altered, as long as they haven't done something with it in the lab, I'm fine with true stevia. Real honey, raw honey is great. And, sugar from sugar cane. Ideally, just, not in a large amount. And we're feeding and nourishing other things so that we're not, so depleted and wanting an overabundance of sugar.
Thank you. And then my other comment really is more about the idea of the polyvagal process of ice water. At first, when you were talking about it, it seemed a little odd to, stand under an ice cold shower. And then second to that or putting your face in an ice cold bucket. But then it reminded me of, there was a movie that Tony Robbins did called You're Not My Guru, where he jumps into ice water every morning as part of his routine. And I think it's in response to what you're just talking about. And so I don't know if you saw that movie, but that was very interesting.
Yeah, so Tony, I have seen that movie, and Tony's very much on to that research about kind of, that cold therapy research.
Mm-hmm.
It's there, the research is there. It's also an Ayurvedic medicine component. So Ayurvedic meaning East Indian mechanism, which has been used for many, many years of, cold showers in the morning. But then bringing it back to just kind of our American neuroscience, current look specifically at the polyvagal nerve, it feeds into that heart rate variability research. So if anyone's familiar with HeartMath, I think they're in California, they do a lot of work with heart rate variability. Bessel van der Kolk, who is amazing. If any of you have not read his book, I highly recommend it, called The Body Keeps the Score. He's a psychiatrist in Massachusetts, and he does all kinds of research of actually looking at yoga and GABA, and the heart rate variability and these different practices and how that physiologically impacts in a really positive way. So that's where I'm pulling all that from, kind of some different components.
That's great. And I have heard of HRV, and I know that a lot of people are introducing that as part of their meditation practice as well. So I don't see anybody writing in any questions at this time, and so we're going to go ahead and wrap up. I would suggest that if you have any additional questions, to circle back with Jolene. She has provided you with her website where you can access her. Jolene said she would be willing to share her slide deck with you if you want to reach out to her personally. We have recorded this webinar that we can make available for folks if they want to look at it, or if they would like to share it with others at a later time. I want to again thank you, Jolene, on behalf of Harmony, and for all of those that are listening, for your time today. It was incredibly informative, both personally and professionally. And I think that the information is well noted for, particularly for folks that are working a recovery program early in recovery or currently in treatment, and how important nutrition is in that recovery process. So thank you again for your time. And we look forward to next month, where we will have a presentation on biofeedback and its work with addiction treatment. So if no one else has any questions, we'll go ahead and close out. Thank you, Jolene.